Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today's episode is one I've been wanting to do for such a long time and I'm really excited for. Today we're speaking to Andrew Kornder. He is a high school student who has such an interesting journey throughout his schooling experiences, and we've been working together for about 5 years now, and he is one of the most passionate people I have ever met. And so I really wanted to get a little bit deeper into where does that passion come from, and I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. This is so exciting for me. I feel like we've spent so many hours chatting. I mean, at least 1,000 on just random things that it's kind of fun to have it recorded.
Yeah. Definitely a nice change of pace.
Yeah. So how's your weekend going, first of all, or your week?
It's going pretty well. Same as always, just working on a bunch of code.
Yeah.
Nothing too exciting.
That is definitely some context I feel like I want to provide for the listeners, which is, the way you approach the projects that you take, I've always been so fascinated by, because you find things that you are briefly interested by. You'll be like, I wonder how this works, or I wonder what mathematical property this follows. And then you'll full send and do your best to explore whatever it is you're interested in. Where do you feel like that started, and what are you currently exploring?
I mean, I've always been very curious. Growing up, I never really got on to watch like TV or anything. My parents didn't want to expose me to like cartoons and I don't know, TV until I was like 6 or 7. Nothing more than that, actually, probably like 8 or 9. So I grew up just reading a bunch of books. And I used to just go into a library and sit down and read a book for hours. So I feel like I've always been curious. But I think like wanting to like explore something like deeper than just surface level started in like maybe freshman year high school, something like that. There was a brief period of time where I was just incredibly bored. I couldn't really find anything that would hold my interest or a hobby that I would enjoy. So I spent most of the summer just trying desperately to find something interesting. And eventually I realized that the thing that, fixed the boredom was just finding something that was interesting and just learning about it. At the time, it was math and coding. And ever since, I've kind of just wanted to explore that as much as I can, chase the interest.
Yeah. Do you remember what the first thing you ever explored was, like, deeply?
I think the first thing was I was on YouTube and I was just, watching mindless content. And I found this channel called 3 Blue 1 Brown, one of possibly the best math education channels on the internet. And it was beautiful. I hadn't really ever thought about math like that. I always liked math, but only in a very like superficial way, learning that certain numbers were cooler than others, and that's about it. And I saw that channel and I was like, dude, this is so much deeper than I thought. There's so much more to be had here. So I spent the next like 2 or 3 weeks binging a lot of math content online and just trying my best to like self-educate myself on mostly just calculus. And yeah, I just kind of taught myself that, and ever since then I kind of just go on Wikipedia or like do some Googling and find new fields of math that I want to research.
I guess like I'm thinking about 3 Blue 1 Brown. I mean, it's such an amazing platform because they take these things that you think would be obvious. What's an example? I've used to watch so many. I feel like I loved that channel. What are some of the questions they explore? It's not coming off the top of my head.
There's a lot of really good ones. One of my favorites is there's one video on there which is an introduction to how you would prove some more like I don't know, more theorems that are just kind of taken for granted. And the example that the video is built around is the surface area of a sphere, which we're told is 4 pi times the radius squared. And you never really think about it. So the video goes into how you would actually prove that and gives you, I think, 3 different proofs, each a different way of looking at it. and just breaks it down for you in a very visual and intuitive way, so that you can look at other theorems like that and other ideas and sort of guess at how they work yourself and maybe even prove it. It's really fascinating.
And their visualizations are on point. I love the aesthetic of how they do their number lines, of everything. It's just so, they've done a lot of different things on infinity, actually really exploring that concept rather than just being like infinity, large number.
Yeah, 3-bit-1 Brown, the critical thing is that it's only made by one dude. And he goes by the name of Grant Sanderson. He's incredible. It's definitely one of the absolute gemstones to math education. In fact, every year, so he started something, I think in 2020, called the Summer of Math Exposition. And ever since, like thousands of channels, even ones I've never posted videos before, will post explanatory math videos in their own style every year. And last year, or this year actually, 3-bit-1 Brown didn't run it because I don't know why, but people did anyways. It's really an incredible experience to see an entire community formed around it.
I mean, I guess the very first project that we did, which was, I think, right as pandemic started, I believe. Yes, it was. It was that summer of the first, when pandemic had just hit. And
so.
we started working on these math problems from, do you remember that website name?
Yeah, Project Euler.
Yes, Project Euler. And you've later expressed, okay, here, just because I have so much context to give, but one of them is that I would say I have learned so much from you in the last 5 years that one of the most beautiful things is, I think, the line of teacher and student, whatever, is unbelievably blurry. It is I think it might actually have to be flipped. But you once gave me an entire lecture on how cool Euler is. Could you maybe give us a little bit of a background into some of those amazing things about him? Because I actually had no idea.
He's kind of like the goat of math. I mean, there's few mathematicians as prolific as him. He was a 17th century mathematician, born in Basel, I believe, Switzerland. And he's kind of a genius. He's had his hands in everything. You can look up pretty much any like math related thing and see his name there. Most notably in his naming and discovery of the constant E, named after him. The E is for Euler, which is a number so ubiquitous it's probably more common than pi. So he's just kind of the goat. He worked so hard he even went blind in one eye. It's definitely incredible.
Yeah, I remember we spent like an entire class one time just like learning more about him. Yeah, he's a fascinating guy. But so there's this website called Project Euler, and they have all these really interesting problems in the intersection of mathematics and computer science. And it was a great way that we had started our classes. And coming to this concept of math, I think one of the things that we in the beginning really connected on is we both had this deep fascination for math. I think your competency is definitely probably higher than mine in it, but I do think like, I mean, it is such an interesting space. When do you feel like you became fascinated by math? And then I'm excited to kind of get into what you think is done poorly in like contemporary mathematical education. But when did you find your interest in math?
I don't know exactly when. I think I first got interested in math in like probably like elementary school, like first or second grade. I don't remember what sparked it, but me and one of my friends, we didn't really like know how to use the internet or anything back then, but we would like go home and like look up like the decimal expansion of numbers like pi or phi and just like be like, whoa, look, it never repeats. But as I said, it was never really more than anything like that. We weren't good enough at math to know anything more beyond just that there were a lot of numbers in it. But I feel like I've just always been kind of interested in math. It's just always been so fascinating to me, the kind of objective like facts, because there's so few things in the world that can be so objective, but math is just universal.
There's something so beautiful about that. I mean, I remember there was an entire class that we had ended up taking on whether like math is something that's discovered or whether it's something that's like invented. And I think even that, like, is it something that just exists in the universe where it's like we're finding it, or is it a whole entire concept that's just been created? And there's so many questions that make math, I think, absolutely philosophically vital to understanding humans themselves. I mean, we read that one book about the history of zero, and that book was so cool. And so, okay, so how do you feel like your schooling in mathematics was growing up? And what did you ever feel like that kind of supported your interest, or do you feel like it sparked that interest, or not really?
I have to say, I think my experience with math education has been pretty negative. Everyone's already heard the gripes about being taught long division, but I feel like my main issue with math comes at least in middle school. I happen to be very lucky and go to, very nice schools. Since I live in Massachusetts, very education-focused state. But sadly, despite having good schooling, every math class I've taken, that is anything more than like arithmetic, seems to focus more on rote and taking things for granted and just being told, the quadratic formula is blah, blah, blah. And I think it's detrimental to math education, because if a student like me was interested in math and wanted to know more about it, and all they're told is that this is truth, memorize it for a test, they're not ever going to be interested in it again. They're just going to hear that and be sad that they can't learn more because no one's willing to teach it to them. And I think that's really sad. It kills the enthusiasm that kids have for learning. And, that's the opposite of teaching.
I think my entire relationship with math changed only after I started studying like abstract in undergrad. But the main reason why is because for the first time you were able to actually ask why. For every single thing that anybody said, you were allowed to be like, why is this true? Until then, if you asked that, I don't think most of my teachers, one, would tell you, nor I don't think they knew either, which it's not something you have to have off the top of your head. But like you said, for even simple things like the quadratic formula, why is that the case? Rather than just like, this is what it is, learn how to plug and chug other numbers into this. Math is not a religion on its own. It's not something you just believe because you're supposed to believe because someone said it. It's like there's so much thought and hundreds, thousands of years of trying and eventually finding a reason for why everything is true. I feel like that entire historical perspective to math is completely lost.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first learned that there were, heroes of math like Euler, or I don't know, there's a million others. Like there's like people like Bernoulli that are just absolute giants of math. Like being taught the story of that was just incredible. And I think if you motivated the courses of math and told people this is why we learn them, and for example, the story of the cubic formula is one of the most interesting like pieces of math history of all time, and it's a shame that not only does it not get taught to kids, but there's no mention of a cubic formula anywhere in schools. It's kind of sad, because
what is it? Actually, I don't know if I'm familiar right now off the top of my head.
It's just the quadratic formula, but for cubic equations.
Oh,
sadly,
cool.
It's a very simple thing, but schools tend to not care about it just because it's not even complicated. It's slightly larger than the quadratic formula, but it's nothing kids can't handle. But I don't know. So it's kind of sad.
Yeah. So my question is, that's a focus. I'm really curious to eventually get on what you think we could do differently. But before we get to that question, we've talked a little bit about the desire for how we go about teaching math. Why should we learn math? But in terms of just simply the curriculum itself, what do you feel like is maybe given too much importance? And then what subjects or areas do you feel like can be given more importance in the world of math?
I think geometry gets a little bit too much time in schools. I think geometry, offers a really nice way for kids to learn about proofs because they're very visual. You can show people a triangle and they can label it and do the proofs working from that diagram. But I think most people take away from geometry, at least in my experience. When I took geometry, most of the kids in the class focused on the fact that it was geometry. Proofs were associated with geometry. And I think if kids were taught to do proofs throughout, pre-algebra and on, I think that would be so impactful if people learned that you can apply a proof to anything. If you just learn what a proof is before geometry, you could have kids prove quadratic formula or, anything from pre-algebra on their own. And that would allow them to grasp the very basics of math and then work with that all, the entire route instead of only learning what a proof is, near the end of their math education.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I 100%. I didn't really even though I did proofs in Geometry 1, I didn't really know I was doing proofs. And 2, you're right. I did think this is something you only did in geometry. And the crazy thing is, when you show someone why a squared plus b squared equals c squared, all of a sudden, every student who learns that is capable of understanding why once they look at the square and whatever they look at the square to show that. I mean, it's not something that has to be done only when you're 18 or 19. I mean, I think there are simpler ways to show why something is the way that it is.
Yeah, I think this argument is just, it's almost like obviously true. Just looking at like YouTube, there are so many creators who do exactly what I'm describing. Like, there's precedent, and those YouTubers like 3Blue1Brown have influenced, millions of people and gotten them into math. People that would ever otherwise have never even touched math. People are so scared of math, and I think, if people put in the effort to learn from what is clearly working, I think that could change.
There does seem to be this hyper focus on computation, which is terribly unfortunate because, I mean, I have so many students who are not only afraid of math, but feel like, okay, I'm bad at math, I can't do math. But it's really just like, I don't know, it's a perspective on how you look at abstraction rather than it is something that speaks on your intelligence. I mean, I really think the levels that we're talking about, everybody can achieve. I don't think we're talking about a high enough level to where this type of stuff is not something people can do. Because the difficult thing in math is discovering new things, not learning what someone has already discovered. That part is actually the really, really simple part.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about math is that it's so well documented, at least recently. Like, it is so easy to find resources for math. The entire point of math is that people write papers about it. If we taught people, not that math is about, adding big numbers together or doing long division, but instead that math is about following in the footsteps of all of the, giants, and just learning to apply that thinking to the world, learning how to think analytically about, a process. I think that would be so much more valuable than teaching people that math is this uselessly abstracted thing that will never apply in the real world.
Yes. It's so funny because I've literally heard this, like, the last 2 or 3 guests have kind of voiced this sentiment of like, when am I going to use sine or cosine in the world, and it's just so interesting because coming from a math, and I know where it's used, and it's so interesting when it's like a scientist or someone or just people in different spaces who kind of, for some reason, math gets this really bad rep of like, I don't know, I think it's made so many people feel bad about themselves, or I don't know, about their intelligence, that it's like an easy one for people to come at too. They're like, like, you don't need this, isn't that,
and people are so proud to say that they haven't used math.
That is pretty funny.
I mean, it's just, and also like math doesn't have to be used. The math itself, you may never use sine in your entire life. You might never ever use a quadratic formula. But the important thing is to teach people, the way of thinking. Teach people that you can prove things about the world and that you can apply theorems to greater things. You can generalize. That's a valuable lesson to teach people.
The skill of abstraction. I mean, 100%. I think that's why philosophy and mathematics are so married to each other. They both, I think, do the same, they train your brain in the same way, just about slightly different things. But it's that ability to like generalize, step back, and be like, can we understand things that seems to be true about the world or people or whatever? So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I think math is so powerful that you can take away so much value from such simple equations. You know, some things can just represent entire systems so concisely.
So let's say you were a math teacher, or you were the curriculum builder for a city, for a new mathematics curriculum. What would you change?
I think I'll probably leave most of like elementary school stuff, you know, the exact same. Maybe remove long division, but you know, I don't think kids need to learn much more beyond arithmetic at that level. But I think in middle school, I think it would be important to, you know, give a heavy amount of like time to like visual proofs and like, you know, like just analytical thinking, because I feel like in my middle school, what I was taught had nothing to do with math. It was more just solving a bunch of quadratics, a lot of linear equations, just, you know, just solving these things, learning how to apply these same procedures. I think if instead there was more time dedicated to like actual visual demonstrations, you know, showing people this is why we get these equations, and then, you know, then doing mostly the same thing, you know, then having people learn to apply those findings, not just apply a procedure. Then I think in high school it'd be mostly the same. You know, leave algebra the same. I think maybe have geometry be part of algebra. And I think having calculus, I think calculus is a really important thing for people to learn, because calculus is when math stops being, you know, prep. You actually start having to think creatively about math. So I think there should be a huge focus on calculus, especially. That'd be what I say should be at least 2 years, you know, pre-calc and then calculus.
That's when it gets. Yeah, I mean, I just remember having such a hard time in calculus in high school. I mean, it's the ability for your brain to abstract, I think, changes at different periods of your life. I mean, it was just so difficult for me to even like conceptualize some of the stuff that they were talking about. And so because of that, I just had to be like, all right, I'm not even going to think about it. Just tell me exactly what I need to do. I'll copy it again and again and again. And then you lose the joy. I hated that class. It just wasn't, I wasn't, you know, really learning either.
Yeah, I mean, you know, calculus is the first like stage in math where you really need to like be able to abstract. In other, you know, areas of math, you know, before calculus, you don't really have to do much more than learn an equation. But in calculus, you have to like think creatively, especially when you get to integral calculus. So I think if you taught that earlier, you know, move that up to like sophomore year, I think, you know, kids, they'd be much more like, I guess, pliable, much easier to learn that kind of abstraction. And most importantly, I think that, you know, if you taught that kind of thinking from the get-go, there wouldn't be a learning curve. It would just be a logical next step in doing math.
Who do you feel like was the teacher that kind of did this best for you in your schooling experience?
That's a good question. I have to say, probably the single best resource I found was definitely YouTube. 3x1 Brown is always one of the greats. And I think just learning to, you know, to be independent and search stuff up on my own. You know, Wikipedia is a fantastic resource, especially for math. But I think the internet has just been so far above any actual teachers I've had.
I mean, I think this is something that's so important, because your ability to, one, identify a desire that you have to want to learn something, and then find exactly what you need on the internet to learn something has mind boggled me, because I now feel like if Andrew can do it, like, why can't I? Like, what if there's something I want to learn, why can't I just sit down and figure out what there is that I need to do? Because you have a really good way of like piecing together different resources to learn pretty much anything about anything. It's not just restrained to math. I mean, you do history stuff, you do science stuff, you do all types of things. And so, one, how do you go about that process? So let's say you identify you want to learn something because you're curious about it. What resources do you go to? How do you kind of go about that process? Is it something that just happens naturally, or do you have like a planned out process for that?
It mostly just happens naturally. I think the internet is so vast that you can, as long as you're like willing to listen, information can just kind of come to you. But, when there's something I want to learn more about, it's pretty simple to find resources. You just, for one, Wikipedia is always a fantastic starting point. You can, get a decent overview on the subject, and then you can broaden your horizons from there. And then after that, you mostly just have to rely on Google. Do some searches, know how to use it, and then just, follow your fancy. If you find an article that looks interesting, read it. Try your best to actually consciously read it instead of just skimming it with your eyes. I've always believed that the internet is just so information dense that it's kind of hard to not learn as long as you're reading critically and actually paying attention.
For the longest time, schools used to be the only medium through which you could learn. You needed, you had libraries, you needed some person to kind of do that explanation for you. But now with the internet, I mean, so much of what education looks like is vastly different. Do you feel like the fundamental role of the school has changed?
I think so. I think the school has stopped being a place where you learn, about life and just learning in general. I think school nowadays kind of has to be a much more like, I don't know, like specialized way to teach, because the internet can teach you pretty much anything, sometimes not well, but the internet can be a place to learn everything. So I think the school's job has to be to step in and teach kids the things that they maybe shouldn't learn on the internet. Things that you can't rely on self-teaching to, properly explain to kids. So stuff like health, stuff like, critical reading skills, stuff like reading and writing. I already said reading, but, stuff that you need actual feedback and, directed teaching to learn well. But I think
discourse. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like knowing how to properly understand an argument. That is so important and something that you can't really learn on your own. But, for things that are more, I don't know, more self-guided, stuff like art, stuff like, stuff like math, things that people can teach themselves, I think should be more left up to the student. Not entirely, but, if there is a way for people to learn effectively through a much more like personalized process, that should absolutely be entertained. A single teacher teaching a class of 30 is going to be far less specialized for that one student than, like a YouTuber who has spent their entire life working specifically on this subject that the student is most interested in. And, that's a good way to learn, assuming that person knows their stuff. And teaching kids to recognize good sources when they find them that should be the school's job.
It's interesting because I think this world that we live in now, the people who are making decisions at these larger levels have yet to experience the internet in the way that you're talking about, where, I mean, truly, I feel like young kids nowadays really have this grasp over the internet that like definitely a lot of adults don't, where it's like they know how to, use Reddit properly. Even using Reddit is such a difficult tool sometimes. I myself don't use it all that well. I don't really know how to navigate Reddit sometimes, but even Discord. There's so many resources and different channels and avenues in which you can learn and communicate and connect with others that I feel like it is going to be really interesting when the younger generation starts to have more influence on the way schools think about the internet and technology. I mean, I've seen schools that completely ban. They're just like no computers until you're 10 years, 10th grade or 9th grade. And it's been so interesting to be like, they build these antagonistic relationships with the internet rather than the way you talk about it, which is like this endless trove of information.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard to navigate that kind of generation gap because the internet is so new, relatively speaking, that kids are raised with the internet their entire life. But people in power tend to, only have had the internet for the last, 1/5 of their lives. That's not really, a good way to have your legislation be made, because kids know so much more about it and yet have no power over it. So I think at some point there will be a huge shift when people in the newer generations start to have more influence over laws and over education. And I really do hope that the internet will start being a resource instead of, this dangerous place that kids are warned to stay off of. Everyone's heard about how Wikipedia is a horrible place that should never be trusted. But, it's one of the greatest resources on the internet. And kids being taught the opposite is, I think it just slows down their education.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked into the number of pages now. I mean, we've done some interesting stuff with Wikipedia, but it is massive. I sometimes forget how many articles there are on that. It's huge.
It's a fantastic
And humans
resource.
put all that together. And the crazy part is humans wrote all of it. I mean, it was before AI generated. Humans really wrote everything on that.
Yeah. And it's so, like, that is such a beautiful, like, I don't know, such a beautiful monument of the internet. That's just this community maintained, library that anyone can access. There's also other branches of the Wikimedia Foundation, stuff like Wikiversity, which you can just go and read about various courses. There's stuff like Wiktionary, which you can go and learn different languages on. It's such a huge library of information that people don't use as much as they should.
So one thing that's been really interesting about your journey in education is, so you went to public school, is that correct, for 10 years or whatever? Was that right?
Yeah, so I went to kindergarten, elementary school in California, and then we moved over to the East Coast and enrolled in a middle school and high school here until about the end of sophomore year, where for various reasons, mostly mental health, we switched to online schooling. It's been going okay.
Yeah. What have you noticed to be the difference? So how does what's the setup of your online schooling? You still have classes, or how does it work?
It's very detached from regular schooling. It's mostly just I get a list of assignments and reading and all that, and I just got to work through it at whatever pace I want. Which is, objectively, it's supposed to be pretty self-guided. I can choose what classes and work through them at whatever pace I want. But I don't know. I wouldn't really say it's better, but I think that's helpful. It's definitely something that should be explored in the future, but it's in a very awkward stage right now because online schooling is very new and it's not really as mainstream as regular schooling. But I'm excited to see where it goes in the future.
Yeah. Is there any part of the regular schooling that you miss?
Oh, definitely. It's, I didn't really understand it when we did the switch, but it's hard to understate how important the physical environment of a school is. Done well, a school can be this, really easy way for kids to learn to socialize and make friends and navigate, dealing with authority. And that's really valuable. Done badly, a school can be this hellish place where, kids get bullied and teachers abuse their power. But, it could be such a valuable place. And online schooling, you just can't really do that. you can have like online Zoom classes, but you don't really get the same environment. I'd say I kind of miss that, but overall, I think, there's benefits to online schooling. Like, for one, if you have social anxiety like I do, not having that social component can be helpful, but it's a double-edged sword.
I mean, I think like I do actually want to talk about anxiety and just kind of, it's interesting because I honestly don't know how often people are having these type of conversations across generations, but it's so interesting because when we talk about education, it's always done in rooms where everyone's 40, 50, 60 years old. Like, it's like the kids who are actually being impacted by any of these decisions are never in the rooms where we're talking about education, which has been a little bit confusing for me. I'm like, why don't we actually just talk to younger people to hear what they think and they have to say? It's all done with numbers, but we don't actually have any conversations. So, and obviously I understand it's hard to speak for an entire generation. It's not possible. But I think we all kind of have like a temperature, a thermometer check on like what are people our age feeling. And obviously it's through our own experiences and our own biases. But I feel like this particular generation has experienced a lot based on what's happening in the world, the pandemic, just as a child, you guys have experienced a lot. How do you feel like the context of the world has impacted kids' just journey through schooling in this particular generation?
Definitely a huge impact. When we moved to the East Coast, we moved here, and then about like 6 months later, pandemic hit. So not only was it already awkward to new kid in the school, but pretty much the second that I was starting to find footing in the school gets shut down and we're sent to online schooling, which, kind of ruined the entire fitting in part. So for the rest of the, I already had pretty bad social anxiety to begin with before the pandemic, but, after the pandemic and, people got reintroduced to the school, I just stayed in online for another like few months. Because I didn't want to, I didn't fit in to begin with, and it was only going to get worse. And after I eventually did go back, pandemic just got in the way of, the social aspect of school. And during that entire time I was in online schooling, I don't think I learned a single thing. It was hard to learn already because it was online, but not having any direction because the school was so, I don't know, out of sorts because of the pandemic, just kind of ruined anyone's ability to pay attention in school effectively. And the teachers didn't know how to navigate it. The world is, education should ideally be this like, I don't know, isolated part of society that isn't affected by, world politics and the like. But sadly, kids are so much more in tune with the current events than people tend to think, and it really does impact it.
I mean, we've had so many conversations. I would say there are two things that I personally have noticed working with young, like whatever, people who you're only 10 years younger, but even in that gap, I've noticed a huge difference. One, I feel like the amount of role models that have been brought down for really, really heinous kind of behavior has been something that I feel like has really shaped and shifted culture's perspective on like those who we typically look up to. Would you agree with that kind of sentiment?
Yeah, it does seem like recently there are a lot of people at the height of stardom that just kind of, I don't know, comes out that they are not the most savory individuals. I don't know, I think that in this day and age, there's just a lot of role models. So, statistics would say that more of them would get caught doing bad things. But, I do think it's a problem with the internet. The ease of which, people can become influential and become famous makes it so much easier for people to abuse that. it's only natural that people will tend to abuse that and get caught doing so. I think that that'll only stop if there is a fundamental shift in how people view the internet. Everyone's already known it, but the internet isn't this perfect safe place. You can't trust what you see on the internet without thinking about it. And I think that people, that needs to be internalized throughout like all of society, not just told to kids, don't trust whatever you read on the internet. It needs to be like, maybe there should be like a class in school where people learn, effective online practices. But sadly, it's just going to be there as long as the internet's going around.
Do you feel like the number of people who have disappointed? I mean, I can think of so many people that I really looked up to, especially when I was a child, that have since, disappointed me in whatever way. Do you feel like it builds this sort of trust issue in just like being skeptical about everyone, which I think is probably a decent thing to do, rather than being like, oh, they sing well, I love them, they must be great people. I don't know. Like, what do you feel like that are there trust issues?
I think so. I think it makes people, wary of, putting their entire soul behind like a celebrity. And I think it's a good thing. I mean, there's been so much talk in the last few years about, quote unquote parasocial relationships, which is fantastic. I mean, it's absolutely great that people are talking and discussing about, how to have healthy online relationships with people you don't know. Celebrities, streamers, content creators. It's a valuable thing to have, be in the public zeitgeist. But I do think it would make kids a little skeptical of any authority figures in their life, because they see people that they thought were, well respected, trustworthy individuals be exposed for heinous things that they're told are the worst thing in the world. So it's only natural that they start to distrust those same figures.
100%. And I think it happens so often to where it makes a huge change in your brain, where you're just like, okay, I'm no longer going to idolize anyone, which is just different than, I think it's not even about good or bad. I mean, I think for so long, this kind of idolization of celebrities was something that was just so natural. So to now be in a place where everyone's skeletons are really revealed, you, I guess, don't idolize these people, which makes us think about pop culture in that aspect just differently than I think it has been in the past.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there's people that, 20 years ago would just be these, public celebrities that everyone knows and loves that have been revealed to, be horrible. And it's making everyone start to realize that, hey, maybe these very rich, very famous people, maybe we don't know them. They've never talked to us. And maybe we have to, take everything they say with a grain of salt, right? I think it's valuable. I think it's definitely a good shift in how we view popularity.
Yeah. I think this is one of the big differences I've noticed between generations. And the other one, I think, is how much political instability has influenced people's belief of like how effective our government is, because I think especially this issue of climate change, I think when I was younger, when I can reflect back on when I was in 5th or 6th or 7th grade, I don't think I thought about a singular large world issue. But I think kids nowadays are all very much aware of, okay, we have climate change going on. There's all this instability in different parts of the world. So what do you feel like that has been for you? Do you find it to be overwhelming sometimes? Because I also know when you're younger, you don't feel like you have too much power or ability to change the course of much. So have these issues made you feel overwhelmed at times?
Absolutely. I'm already kind of resigned to a lot of issues in the world. Stuff like climate change and, increasing tension between different nations. Sadly, it's just something that everyone's aware of now, but not really something anyone has any power over. So, it can feel overwhelming at times, knowing that there are people, 5 times my age who are deciding my fate through business deals and the like. That, it's depressing, but it wouldn't be a stretch to say that I think most people my generation probably also feel about the same. It's just kind of a certain time in the world where there's a lot of issues, and all the power is concentrated among very few people.
So how do you kind of navigate that? I mean, are there things that you think, because the only other way is to be ignorant of it, to be like, all right, I don't even know this is happening, whether it happens or not, I'm not going to bother myself with it. Have you found people around you in your age or yourself techniques to kind of navigate, okay, there is all this going on, but I want to stay informed, but I'm not going to resign hope?
I mean, I think the single best, this is going to sound really like, I don't know, the opposite of what it's intended to do, but I think the best solution to that feeling of despair is just to learn more about it. Because luckily, humanity tends to, be pretty good at dealing with issues. So, like doing more research about climate change. When I first learned how dire the situation is, that was really depressing. But, the more research I did, the more I've learned about it. It's actually, there's rays of hope, right? There's people working to combat the issue. And I think you can't learn about that if you never get past surface level. Sadly, there are a lot of issues that are just depressing. So I think, I don't know, man. I think it might just be wise to teach kids how to, how to cry softly.
That's sad. I mean, that's sad though. I mean, it's interesting because yesterday I interviewed this amazing woman on the last episode, and she does a lot of work in sustainability and plastic, just reduction of plastic use. And she talked a lot about how it can feel overwhelming so much, but the thing that gives her hope is to like always be in touch with the 10,000, 15,000 team that like also deeply care about these issues. When you're able to connect with other humans on the planet who also care, it doesn't feel so isolating. And sometimes it feels that the isolation is the part that can really, destroy the hope.
Yeah, so absolutely.
The feeling of not being alone. Yeah.
Yeah. If you feel like you're the only one that cares about an issue, it's going to feel so much worse than, if you can see there are other people like you and not feel so alone in the despair. But there's not always a way to fix things, and that's just kind of the fact about a lot of issues in the world. I think it's I think everyone can find hope in their own ways, especially through talking with other people and learning more about the situation. But I wouldn't at all be surprised if a lot of kids my age are also, despairing at the world around them. It seems to be an increasing sentiment lately.
I'm just thinking as a school or as a teacher, what are things you can do about that? I mean, I think one is having honest conversations, not being like, oh, you're too young, maybe you won't understand it, or maybe you're not capable of thinking about it, but really hearing what people have to say. But I mean, that's only 101. I mean, what else do you think can be done to really cultivate spaces to confront these fears and issues?
I mean, telling people they have power. People do have power, especially when it comes to like voting and writing into candidates and the like. And schools could teach that. Schools could say, hey, this is an ongoing issue in the world, and these are some steps we can take to avoid it. And sadly, it's hard to say that and actually give people valuable steps that they can take. But I think telling kids the honest truth, and then telling kids here are the reasons that we can still have hope. Although sadly, I don't know if there's a way for teachers to really do that effectively. I think that might be more up to parents. Telling their kids, here's how we deal with issues like this, and here's the state of the world. Teachers are probably more suited to just informing the kids, but I think it's part of the school's responsibility to inform kids about current events, as early as elementary school.
And can it be done in a way that it's not How would you go about that? I'm trying to think, like, would it be overwhelming, or is it okay for the kids to be overwhelmed, or?
I think, honestly, I think it's possible to teach kids about issues like climate change without them being overwhelmed, because, you know, kids are kids are a lot smarter than people think. Kids are just as intelligent as adults, they just don't have the same like breadth of knowledge. So I think you could probably tell kids, hey, the earth is heating up, here are the reasons why. And then, I don't think they'd be that overwhelmed. They'd probably be a little overwhelmed if you told them the world was ending, but you don't need to tell them that. You just need to tell them that this is an ongoing issue and scientists are working hard to combat it, and here are the culprits. I don't think it is really that overwhelming to learn about climate change, if it's, especially because most things are overwhelming to hear about. Stuff like climate change is overwhelming to hear about because it's hard to to really fathom the extent of it. And I think that's because we're told that it's not really that big of an issue for so long, and now it's actually a huge issue, right? So I think if you taught kids that it's an issue from the very get-go, I don't think it would be that overwhelming. Kids are pretty, they're pretty quick to just incorporate something into their worldview.
Yeah, that's a really good point, huh? I think there's this like, and it's in the definition of patronizing, but I do think there's this like belief of how older people even think about younger people that like really influences the way we teach and speak to them. And then there's this lack of just giving someone the respect of like, I always experienced this when I was a kid. I was like, it feels like everyone's just talking to me like I'm a kid, which is kind of like this substandard person where you're like, oh, you don't really know what you're talking about. Like now that I'm older, I understand the value of experience. I understand the value of these things. But that being said, I still think the things that I thought when I was 18 and 17 are still important and valid, whether they were backed by experience or not. And I think that all underlies this belief that, okay, like children are X and adults are Y, and therefore we don't need to. And I find this so often in schools that I think that it's actually a travesty in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, kids are never going to get that experience. They're never going to learn unless you teach them. And they'll learn so much easier if you teach them like equals. Explain things to them the way you would want it to be explained to you. Don't try to baby them. Kids are so quick to pick up on emotions. That's probably the thing that they're the best at. And if you patronize a kid when you're talking to him, they're going to know that. They're going to know that they're being treated like a kid, and kids don't like that. It's possible to keep your authority as an adult while also, talking to a kid in a way that doesn't belittle them and make them feel that they don't know anything. Because kids love to learn. They'd be just willing to learn if you just taught them.
So I mean, can you give some examples where you feel like this type of patronizing happens, and then what is like kind of a slightly different way of going about it? Because I think what you're touching on is really important.
That's a good question. Especially in math, I think it happens. I've had experiences where I would ask a teacher, more information about a subject, and I would be told, no, it's in the textbook, go look at it. Like, I'm not talking to you. And that just kind of, you want to feel that you can learn from the teacher and that they want to teach you. Some of my best experiences in school have been with a teacher that is enthusiastic to teach. And if you don't make that clear to the kid, then they're not going to want to learn from you. I think that's the key thing. I think a teacher having enthusiasm and being open to engage a kid in discussion about a subject, I think that's one of the most valuable things a teacher can do. As long as they, pay attention to the kid and respond to them and, talk with them about what they want to learn. That's what they want to
do. Emotions are picked up. Yeah, I mean, I want to spend a little bit more time thinking about this because, you're right. I mean, when as an instructor or whatever, when you embody like, okay, one, I care about this, I care about you, and I'm going to treat you like you're also a human being who is competent and capable, then all of a sudden the entire dynamic changes. Then, I mean, so many, and I found my public school to not only treat me like a child, but to also treat me like a bad person, which I feel like is a whole added element of like on default, you're a bad person, you are trying to break the rules. Like that's a whole other element that I think talks a lot about how prison like schools can be sometimes. But it is so interesting that if you like dismantled both of those, I'm going to treat you with respect, and I'm going to actually act like you're not always looking to do like no good, then maybe your relationship of what it feels like to be at school would be so different.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what we're talking about is pretty idealistic. It'd be pretty hard to ask teachers to always have enthusiasm. They don't really get paid enough for that. But, I think it's a good ideal to strive for. I think it's reasonable to say that kids want to feel like they're, cared for by teachers. They don't want to feel like they're being made to sit there and listen for 8 hours straight then go home. That's no fun to anyone.
So I guess like the way I would love to kind of, put a bow on this conversation is I think all the things that you have experienced and learned, I feel like you've somehow been able to keep your passion and your, vitality for learning alive. And I think it can be really hard when you're dealing with all this noise around you and the stresses of schooling and so on and so forth. How do you protect your energy and keep that curiosity alive and don't let it kind of just get squashed?
It's a good question. There have been times where I'll like get burnt out from, trying too hard to, learn about something or work on something. And that can kill the enthusiasm for a few days. But honestly, I think it just has to be, you have to find something that you can still enjoy despite that. Like I might get burnt out from working on a project of like coding for too long, but I enjoy it so much that give it a few days and I can, still work on it and still have enthusiasm for it. I think you just have to find that thing in life. And that's, pretty hard to do, much easier to say. But, I think everyone needs to spend a few months in their life, at the very least, just trying a bunch of different things and, trying to explore as many topics as they can. And when you find something, just follow it. If you do get burnt out, I think you need to learn how much time it took for you to get burnt out, what you did, and, take steps to mitigate that, right? Take breaks, spend more time reading than you do working. Learning is fun. And I think if you spend too much time trying to find value in the learning, I think you'll just get tired of that. But just learning for the sake of learning, I think works.
Wow. If you had interviewed the 17-year-old version of myself, I wish I had a video of that. I'm like, I don't even know what I would have said. I wish I had one piece of document where I could look back and be like, I think I don't have any of my essays. I unfortunately I cannot even find anything that would accurately capture what the 17-year-old version of myself was thinking. But I mean, wow. I mean, you've done such good work, and I've always told you this in classes, but in general, I'm very excited to see where you end up actually applying yourself in the world. I mean, the world is your oyster. I mean, truly, you can do anything, and you can make a lot of change in whatever you put your mind to. And so it's very exciting to just be part of that process and see where you eventually end up kind of putting all your skills to. But you're a deep thinker, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I try.
Yeah, this was a lovely conversation. I feel like it's hard to it's especially with you. It's hard to ever know whether I'm talking to a 35-year-old or whether I'm talking to a 17-year-old. And it's very cool how much you've learned about the world and how much you've thought about it in the time that you've been on the planet. So go work.
Yeah. It's always fun to think about the world and try to like. I think the most valuable thing someone can do is like try to actually put words to their thoughts and their feelings. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for joining the show, man. This was a great conversation, actually. I'm so excited just for the day today. I feel really good and refreshed. I really appreciate you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.